A little while back, about a month, I wrote a post called Forget Your Trauma, Part 1, implying there'd be a Part 2. And several people recently have written to me and said hey, when's Part 2 coming? So in response to popular demand, I'll start. I'd like to start by a little bit of smudging and prayer. And so I'm going to light up the smudge bowl, which I have. Get the sage going, and I wanted to start this way because I do this ritual every day of smudging and prayer in the morning. And partly, I'm going to keep it short, but partly I want to do it because this prayer and the form of it has a lot to do with the content of what I'm going to talk about in terms of trauma. So, great mystery. Spirit that moves through all things. Thank you for this day. Thank you for life. My life, our lives. One more chance to live on this beautiful, beautiful earth. Help me this day to look at the world the way it is and to start right here, right now, with being grateful for it as it is without waiting for it to somehow be fair or to somehow meet my preconceptions of how it should be. But let me say yes to life just the way it is, and help me to find the way that I can change the way I look at the world, to see, to accept its beauty and its wonder, its terror and its joy and love, its creation and destruction. And may this time, this video, this prayer, help us to come to a place where we can accept the world the way it is and love it the way it is. Aho. So, as I said, I start every morning with prayer. And let me just say, in my journey to find my authentic self, I'll start personally. I was deeply influenced by Carlos Castaneda, whose teacher, Don Juan, constantly told him to reduce his self-importance. For when the self, or the ego, is placed in the center of one's world, in the center of your attention, the world around it has to shrink correspondingly. This idea, this point of view, is a core teaching of every spiritual tradition, each of which involves various forms and practices to break the obsession with that self and to open to that vaster, unexplored realm beyond it. So the first thing I want to say is trauma relentlessly focuses on that self and the self as victim, but in focusing on that self, it has to shrink, and it blocks us from opening to the vaster, unexplored world that's beyond us and our preconceptions. Secondly, another reason I want to say forget your trauma is that research in the field of cognitive therapy has shown over and over that the two most effective virtues, if you want to call them that, in promoting a sense of joy and satisfaction in life are gratitude and hope. And that prayer was an expression of gratitude. So developing an attitude or practice of gratitude and hope connects us to something larger than ourselves, as well as a possible and better future. Focusing on trauma has us looking backward and not towards a possible and better future, but backwards towards an attitude of victimhood and expectations of negative consequences. I want to, reason number 3. Everybody is familiar with placebos. The placebo effect is when individuals experience real improvements in their conditions due to their expectations about the treatment. But placebos have we could say, a dark cousin called nocebos. And I'm going to give you an example of that. So, a 29-year-old builder went to the hospital after having jumped off a ladder onto a 6-in nail that just pierced his boot. Moving the nail was so painful, he had to be sedated with powerful drugs in order to remove it. But when the medics took off the boot, they discovered that the nail had actually missed his foot entirely and gone between his toes. The builder's pain was caused by his belief that the nail had skewered his foot. So those detrimental effects of negative expectations are called nocebo effects. And for evolutionary reasons, the need to avoid danger and survive, the nocebo effects are much larger than placebo effects. Now, in regards to trauma, I would say, when I say forget your trauma, focusing on the bad things that might happen rather than the good, then creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the focus on trauma, which is about being overly concerned with safety, fear of being triggered, etc., helps produce and exaggerate mental health issues. All right, and the next reason I just want to say is probably the biggest problem with focusing on trauma. And there's a well-known author, Abigail Shrier, who writes about this a lot, is that it simply doesn't work. Focusing on trauma makes things worse. She notes, I'm reading here, that trauma has never been a recognized mental health diagnosis. And in practice, trauma is just equated with any hurt you've suffered in childhood. And this misinterpretation is then complicated by the fact that in school, teachers and school staff are all mandatory reporters. And if you have a diagnosis, it changes how you see the world. It changes how you see yourself. It creates limitations on what a person thinks he or she can achieve, and it encourages dependency. Dependency on a treatment, on a therapist, or on prescription medications, all with all sorts of known side effects. Moving on. Also, if you're kind of watching the news or you're familiar with podcasts, I just want to say that trauma has also become almost a compulsive and repetitive narrative or story in some people's mind. There's an influential author and podcaster called Gabor Mate, and he sees the whole world of mental health through the lens of trauma. And he attributes the epidemic of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and most everything else to it. So I have a friend, here's an example. I have a friend who's 78 years old, who's still talking about his birth trauma. One would think he'd be over that by now. And I actually have met people whose lives revolve around their trauma while they were still in the womb. And some other people, like Thomas Hubel, take it all the way to ancestral, intergenerational, and mostly on the political left, we also have collective, racial, sexual, gender, and climate change trauma. How much is enough? And while all this is happening, research has also revealed that there are other possible explanations for all this. Every one of these conditions I mentioned above and problems happen to be known known consequences of too much screen time. Why not choose that as your narrative? I mean, take a look at the mental health of Gen Z, and it's a slight exaggeration, but the general attitude towards Gen Z with all that screen time is that the whole generation is going off the rails. Okay, there's maybe some of you know the author and podcaster named Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, and he's become really popular in terms of his attempt to get social media and screens out of the schools. One of the things he talked about I think it was in the coddling of the American mind, he said there are 3 great untruths that are almost universally taught in our educational system. And every one of these untruths contradicts ancient wisdom, modern psychology, and also basic common sense. The first great untruth is that you are fragile and you can be harmed permanently by words. The second great untruth is always trust your feelings. And the result of that is thinking something is wrong whenever you have an uncomfortable feeling teaches kids to be weak and paranoid. And the third thing that's commonly taught in the educational world is to see the world, the moral world, as binary. It's us versus them. So if you feel something bad is happening, they must be doing something to you. Okay, another of my complaints about focusing on trauma is that the evidence of much of what's considered trauma is totally influenced by social contagion. I routinely have, or people routinely ignore that the rate of children expressing gender dysphoria is less than 1% in Ohio. Well, in Los Angeles, it's over 20%. It's no accident that in Los Angeles, coming out is celebrated and praised as an example of being courageous and heroic. And it gives an immediate self-esteem boost. I have a friend, he's actually a local friend in Putney, who about 20 years ago, his wife went to graduate school about 20 miles away. She went to graduate school in social work, and she quickly became radicalized. Announcing that she was a sexual abuse survivor brought her sympathy and quick acceptance from her cohort of students. And though her claimed abuse turned out to be simply that she shared a bedroom with her older sister, who brought her boyfriends home and made out with them in the same room as her. I wonder how she survived. But claiming that abuse quickly gave her acceptance. It gave her social credibility and made her one of the group. And the truth on the ground, and I think we all know this, is that some of the most privileged people in human history have become preoccupied with their perceived trauma. And that's both staggeringly hypocritical, and it's a way to avoid and not recognize trauma that actually is happening in the world. The truth is that for most of human history, famines, wars, and epidemics were constant dangers, and sanitation and medical care were non-existent. Through most of human history, half or more of kids didn't make it to age 10. My father and mother, each born 110 years ago, both lost brothers. And so siblings, children, parents, people dying in one's own family was common. But now, in the first world countries, kids are raised in environments where we've pretty much, any real danger have been eliminated. And yet, living in environments where everything, all danger has been eliminated, we've become hyper-focused on making everything safe. And in that environment, the suicide rate is climbing. I always kind of wonder why. And this is my theory. You can agree or disagree if you like, but maybe because no one is being taught, no one has to learn basic skills of how to live or even survive. So, maybe they take on attitudes and behaviors which are self-destructive because their lives have been so easy, there's no cost for being dumb. All right, but I want to, maybe as I get towards wrapping up, I want to come back to Abigail Shrier. She is the author of Bad Therapy, Why Kids Aren't Growing Up. Anyway, and she writes, I'm going to pull out my piece of paper here. So she writes when she says, by chance, when I was writing this book, Why Kids Aren't Growing Up, my son returned home from a sleepaway camp with a persistent stomachache. I took him to urgent care, where a nurse asked me to leave the room so he could administer a mental health screening tool put out by the National Institute of Mental Health. This was an explicit protocol. Quote, ask parents to leave so you can administer the following questions to kids 8 and up. And this is administered without whether they've shown any signs of mental distress or not. She writes, I requested a copy of the survey and photographed it. Here, verbatim, are the 5 questions the nurse intended to put to my son in private. Number 1, in the past few weeks, have you ever wished you were dead? Number 2, in the past few weeks, have you ever felt that you or your family would be better off if you were dead? Question 3, in the past week, have you been having thoughts about killing yourself? Question 4, have you ever tried to kill yourself? If yes, how? When? Number 5, are you think of killing yourself right now? And if you are, how are you thinking of doing it? Again, she writes that recently the state of Illinois announced that Illinois is now the first state in the nation to require mental health screenings in its public schools. So all of these questions that I just spoke about are now going to be required every year in public schools. And the governor boasted on X, which evidently is Twitter, our schools should be inclusive places where students are not just comfortable asking for help, they're empowered to do it. So, empowered to ask for help? Mandatory mental health screenings for all public school kids is really more about submitting to invasive questioning by adults. At the same time, there has never been any proof that mental health screenings improve mental health outcomes in the least. Anyway, as I read this, I was pretty shocked reading that. It's been a long time since I was in school, and the thought that this was becoming normal is actually sickening to me. Kids are wildly suggestible, and if they hear these questions yearly from adults, suicide and seeing themselves as victim becomes normalized. Most children don't have mental issues or symptoms, but these surveys are required and repeated yearly, or everyone, and besides usurping the role of the parents as the child's protectors or caretakers, everyone gets funneled into the mental health industry pipeline. But anyway, I could go on about trauma and my objection to focus on it, but I want to sum it up by returning to my first spiritual guide, Carlos Castaneda, who said, "We can make ourselves weak, or we can make ourselves strong. The amount of work is the same." The world is filled with light and shadow, joy and sorrow, terror and wonder. We can't change that. And nature has always included earthquakes, floods, tornadoes, predators, and prey. Nature is not nice, and we can't change that. But we can make ourselves weak, or we can make ourselves strong. And to focus on hurts of the past, to assert that words are violent, and to allege that the world around us is responsible for us feeling safe makes us weak. It avoids the uncomfortable task of growing up and taking responsibility. I mean responsibility. Developing the ability to respond to the world as it is, creative, destructive, beautiful, and ugly, and to create a meaningful and passionate life there. Believing in and choosing to do that will make us strong. Let's do it. Aho.